There are 9 specific behaviors that researchers have identified as slowing aging at the cellular level. Not the surface signs like grey hair or wrinkles, but the actual machinery inside your cells that determines how fast you accumulate damage, how quickly your tissues regenerate, and whether your biological age tracks ahead of or behind your chronological age. These 9 habits work through different mechanisms. Some target your mitochondria, the energy producers inside every cell. Some affect your telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of your chromosomes. Some reduce the chronic low-grade inflammation that scientists now call inflammaging because it's so closely tied to how fast you age. And some activate ancient cellular cleanup systems that your body inherited from organisms that lived hundreds of millions of years ago. The remarkable thing about these 9 habits is that none of them require expensive supplements, hormone therapy, or experimental drugs. They're available to anyone at any age, starting today. But what we're now understanding is that most people have been told to focus on the wrong things entirely. The advice has been about weight, calories, and cardio. The real story is happening inside your cells, in microscopic structures most people have never heard of. And the habits that protect those structures look very different from what mainstream health advice has been telling you for the last 30 years. Hi, I'm Dr. Alex. I'm an emergency medicine doctor, and after nearly 10 years working in AANDE, I've seen what happens when preventable decline isn't prevented. I've watched people in their 60s and 70s come through the department with bodies that look 20 years older than their birth certificates suggest, and I've seen people in their 80s come through with cellular health that puts most 50-year-olds to shame. The difference isn't genetics, not mostly. The difference is what they did across the previous decades. And my goal now is to help people make those decisions earlier with better information so they can live longer, healthier, more independent lives. So let me make you a promise. I promise to keep creating the most helpful videos I possibly can, grounded in science and the latest research, to help you live longer and to help you prevent the diseases I see in the emergency department every single day. And all I ask in return is that you give this fairly new channel a chance and hit the subscribe button. If you get to the end of this video and you didn't think it was worth your time, or you've not learned something new, then feel free to unsubscribe. No hard feelings. But if you give me your time and your attention, I'll give you everything I've learned from over a decade in medicine. So please help me out. Hit the subscribe button to help this channel reach more people like you, and let's continue. So before I walk you through the 9 habits, I want to spend a few minutes explaining what's actually happening inside your cells as you age, because the habits only make sense once you understand the machinery they're protecting. There are several biological processes that scientists now consider the hallmarks of aging, and 4 of them are particularly important for our purposes today. Once you understand these 4, the 9 habits will land with much more force. The first is mitochondrial decline. Inside almost every cell in your body are tiny structures called mitochondria. Think of them as miniature power stations. They take the food you eat and the oxygen you breathe and convert them into a molecule called ATP, which is the energy currency that runs every process in your body. From your heartbeat, to your thinking, to your immune response, all of it runs on mitochondrial output. As you age, 2 things happen. The number of mitochondria in your cells declines, and the ones that remain become less efficient and start producing more waste in the form of free radicals, which damage the surrounding tissue. Tired, weak, foggy, slow to recover. Most of what people call aging is mitochondrial decline. The second hallmark is telomere shortening. At the ends of every chromosome in your cells, there are protective caps called telomeres. Imagine the plastic tips on the ends of shoelaces. Their job is to stop the genetic material inside the chromosome from fraying when the cell divides. Every time a cell divides, the telomeres get a little shorter. When they get too short, the cell can no longer divide safely, and it either dies or enters a state called senescence, which is essentially a zombie state where the cell stops working properly but refuses to die. These senescent cells then release inflammatory signals that damage neighboring tissue. Short telomeres are associated with faster biological aging, higher risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, and earlier mortality. The third hallmark is chronic low-grade inflammation, which researchers have started calling inflammaging because it's so tightly linked to the aging process. Inflammation is a normal and necessary part of how your body responds to injury or infection. The problem is when it becomes chronic, simmering in the background at low levels for years or decades. This kind of inflammation damages blood vessels, brain tissue, joint cartilage, and the lining of your gut. It accelerates almost every age-related disease we know of, from heart disease to Alzheimer's to type 2 diabetes. And here's where it gets really interesting. Many of the lifestyle choices that drive inflammaging are the same ones that damage mitochondria and shorten telomeres. The hallmarks aren't separate problems, they're an interconnected web. The fourth hallmark is impaired autophagy. This one sounds technical, but the concept is simple. Autophagy, which translates roughly to self-eating, is your body's cellular cleanup system. Inside every cell, there's a recycling crew that identifies damaged proteins, broken organelles, and misfolded molecules, and breaks them down for parts. This system runs constantly, but it ramps up significantly under certain conditions, particularly when cells experience mild stress like fasting or exercise. When autophagy is working well, your cells stay clean, efficient, and resilient. When autophagy slows down with age, cellular debris accumulates. The cell becomes cluttered with broken parts. Function declines. Research published in journals like Nature and Cell Metabolism has shown that activating autophagy is one of the most powerful interventions we have for extending health span in animal studies, and the human evidence is now catching up. So those are the four mechanisms we're trying to protect: mitochondria, telomeres, inflammation, and autophagy. Now let's talk about what most people are getting wrong. Just really quickly, if you're getting value from this video so far, please consider subscribing. The mistake almost everyone over 40 is making is treating aging as a cosmetic and weight problem when it's really a cellular maintenance problem. We've been sold the idea that if your weight is in a normal range and your blood pressure looks acceptable at your annual checkup, you're aging well. The truth is that you can have a perfectly normal BMI, a clean lipid panel, and unremarkable blood pressure while your mitochondria are dying off, your telomeres are shortening rapidly, your tissues are quietly inflamed, and your cellular cleanup systems are running at half speed. None of these things show up on a standard medical test. None of them cause symptoms you would notice day to day. They show up 15 or 20 years later as the disease that finally lands you in my emergency department. And by then, the damage has been accumulating for decades. This isn't your fault. The standard medical model wasn't designed to track cellular aging. It was designed to catch disease once it's manifested. Prevention at the cellular level is a much newer field, and most of the advice that filters down to patients hasn't caught up. Let me give you a few examples of what this looks like in everyday life. The first is the breakfast pattern. Most people in the developed world wake up, have a coffee, and eat a high-carbohydrate breakfast within an hour of getting out of bed. Cereal, toast, a pastry, fruit juice, sometimes all of the above. This pattern keeps insulin elevated almost continuously through the day because there's never a long enough fasted window for it to drop. And as we'll see, sustained high insulin is one of the most direct suppressors of autophagy. The cleanup crew never gets called. The second example is the sedentary office day with an evening walk. Many people in their 50s and 60s think they're being active because they walk for 30 to 45 minutes in the evening after work. The walk is genuinely good, but the 8 hours of continuous sitting that preceded it has produced a metabolic state that the walk doesn't fully reverse. Mitochondrial function in skeletal muscle declines rapidly during prolonged sitting, and a single bout of exercise at the end of the day doesn't restore it. The third is the late night snack on the sofa. Many people finish dinner, then have something else 2 or 3 hours later while watching television. The snack is often something processed, sweet, and eaten without much thought. What this does is push your last food intake right up against your sleep window, which suppresses overnight autophagy and disrupts the deep sleep that drives much of your overnight cellular repair. The fourth is the chronic stress that nobody addresses because it feels normal. The job that's demanding but tolerable, the family responsibilities that never let up, the financial pressures that hum in the background. None of it is acutely bad enough to act on, so it stays. And the cortisol it produces day after day for years accelerates telomere shortening more than almost any other factor we've measured. These patterns aren't unusual. They're the default lives of most middle-class adults in the UK, the US, Australia, and most of the developed world. They look completely normal from the outside, but underneath, they're driving cellular aging at a faster rate than the body can repair. So what do we do about it? I'm not advocating for extreme approaches here. You don't need to fast for 72 hours, take ice baths at dawn, or move into a sauna. The 9 habits I'm about to walk you through are evidence-based, accessible, and most importantly, sustainable across decades. Each one targets at least one of the 4 hallmarks we discussed earlier, and several of them target multiple hallmarks simultaneously. The first habit is resistance training 2 to 3 times per week. Lifting something heavy, whether that's dumbbells, kettlebells, resistance bands, or your own body weight, is one of the most powerful interventions we have for mitochondrial health. When you challenge your muscles with resistance, you stimulate the production of new mitochondria, a process called mitochondrial biogenesis. You also release a cascade of signaling molecules called myokines that travel through your bloodstream and reduce inflammation in distant tissues, including your brain. Research published in Cell Metabolism has shown that resistance training in older adults can partially reverse age-related changes in muscle gene expression, essentially making the muscle cells look younger at the molecular level. This isn't a marginal effect, it's profound. The second habit is eating within a compressed daily window, often called time-restricted eating. The idea is simple. Most days, try to eat all of your food within a 10 to 12 hour window, leaving 12 to 14 hours of overnight fasting. For most people, that's something like finishing dinner by 7 or 8 in the evening and not eating again until 7 or 8 the next morning. This isn't about cutting calories, it's about giving your insulin a chance to fall, which allows autophagy to ramp up overnight. Your cellular cleanup crew gets the time it needs to do its work. Studies in journals like the New England Journal of Medicine have shown that this pattern improves insulin sensitivity, reduces inflammatory markers, and supports cellular repair, even when total calorie intake stays the same. The third habit is consuming adequate protein distributed across the day. As you age, your body becomes less efficient at using dietary protein to build and maintain tissue, a phenomenon called anabolic resistance. To overcome it, adults over 50 benefit from around 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day, distributed across 2 or 3 meals. For a 70 kilogram person, that's roughly 85 to 110 grams daily. Without adequate protein, your body struggles to repair damaged tissue, maintain muscle mass, and support immune function. Sources can include eggs, fish, poultry, lean meat, dairy, legumes, and tofu. The goal is consistency, not perfection. The fourth habit is getting 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep, with particular attention to the consistency of your bedtime. Sleep is when your brain runs its glymphatic system, a recently discovered cleanup network that flushes out waste products, including the proteins associated with Alzheimer's disease. Sleep is also when your cells run a significant portion of their daily autophagy and when your body releases growth hormone, which supports tissue repair. Research published in the journal Sleep has shown that adults who consistently sleep less than 6 hours a night show accelerated biological aging on multiple cellular markers, including telomere length and inflammatory markers. The fifth habit is regular zone 2 cardio, which is moderate intensity aerobic exercise, where you can still hold a conversation, but you're breathing harder than normal. 3 to 4 sessions per week of 30 to 45 minutes is a reasonable target. This kind of exercise is the single most powerful stimulus we have for improving mitochondrial function. It increases both the number and efficiency of mitochondria, particularly in the muscles you're using. Walking briskly uphill, cycling at moderate effort, swimming or rowing all qualify. The key is the intensity, not the activity. The sixth habit is eating a diet centered on whole foods, with particular emphasis on plants. The specific foods that come up repeatedly in longevity research include leafy greens, berries, fatty fish, olive oil, nuts, legumes, and fermented foods. The mechanism here is multiple. The polyphenols in colorful plants reduce oxidative stress on mitochondria. The omega-3 fats in fish lower inflammatory markers. The fiber in plants feeds the gut bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids, which themselves reduce systemic inflammation. The Mediterranean dietary pattern, which combines all of these elements, has been associated in multiple long-term studies with longer telomeres, lower inflammatory markers, and reduced all-cause mortality. The seventh habit is managing chronic stress, not by eliminating it, which is impossible, but by interrupting it daily. The interventions that have the strongest evidence include meditation, breathwork, time in nature, and deliberate periods of disconnection from screens and notifications. What these have in common is that they activate the parasympathetic branch of your nervous system, which lowers cortisol, reduces blood pressure, and slows the rate of telomere shortening. Even 10 to 15 minutes a day of intentional stress interruption produces measurable effects within weeks. The eighth habit is maintaining strong social connections. This one surprises people because it sounds soft compared to the others, but the evidence is genuinely compelling. Loneliness and social isolation have been shown in research published in journals like PNAS and The Lancet to accelerate biological aging at rates comparable to smoking. The mechanism appears to involve chronic activation of stress pathways and elevated inflammation. Regular meaningful contact with other humans, whether family, friends, neighbors, or community groups, protects against this. Quality matters more than quantity. The ninth habit is moderating or eliminating alcohol. I know this one is unpopular, but the data has shifted significantly in the last decade. The earlier studies that suggested moderate drinking was protective have largely been overturned by better designed research. Alcohol damages mitochondria directly, increases inflammation, disrupts sleep architecture, and accelerates telomere shortening. The dose-response relationship is essentially linear, meaning that less is always better and none is best from a cellular aging standpoint. I'm not telling anyone they have to give up wine with dinner. I'm telling you that if you're serious about cellular aging, this is one of the highest impact areas to address. Here's where I want to be clear about something. I'm not suggesting anyone stop taking their medication or change their treatment plan without talking to their doctor. Medication and lifestyle are not opposing forces, they work better together. If you're on blood pressure medication, on a statin, on something for diabetes, please continue working with your prescribing clinician. What I'm offering is a foundation that, in many cases, makes those medications more effective, and sometimes allows for lower doses over time, under medical supervision. This is about adding to your treatment, not subtracting from it. In emergency medicine, I've seen the consequences of cellular aging play out in slow motion across decades. The 70-year-old who comes in with a heart attack and whose coronary arteries look like those of someone 15 years older. The 65-year-old with early cognitive symptoms whose brain scan shows the kind of changes we used to expect a decade later. The 75-year-old who fractures a hip and never walks unaided again because the underlying tissue resilience just isn't there. These aren't accidents of bad luck, they're the predictable outcomes of decades of accumulated cellular damage. But I've also seen the other side of this, and it's genuinely encouraging. I've had patients in their 60s and early 70s who, after a wake-up call, started implementing several of these habits. Within a year, their inflammatory markers improved, their blood sugar stabilized, their resting heart rate dropped, their grip strength increased, and they reported feeling sharper and more energetic than they had in a decade. One patient told me that for the first time since her 40s, she felt like her body was working with her rather than against her. The cellular machinery is responsive, even late in life. The biology that built you in your 20s is still operating in your 70s. It just needs the right inputs. When you zoom out and think about what these 9 habits really represent, it's not a wellness regimen. It's a philosophy of how you want the next 20 or 30 years of your life to unfold. The choice isn't between living for pleasure and living for longevity. The choice is between making small, consistent deposits into a biological pension that pays out in mobility, clarity, and independence, or letting that account quietly drain through habits that feel normal but are silently accelerating your aging at the cellular level. The remarkable thing is that none of these habits require you to be perfect. You can do them imperfectly, miss days, slip up, and still come out enormously ahead of where you'd be without them. The body is forgiving, it responds to direction more than to perfection. Start with one habit, pick the one that feels most accessible to you right now, whether that's resistance training, time-restricted eating, or going to bed at a consistent hour. Build that into your week. Once it feels automatic, add another. Within a year, you can have all 9 in place, not as a regimen you're forcing yourself to follow, but as the rhythm of how you live, and the cellular machinery, the mitochondria, the telomeres, the autophagy systems, the inflammatory pathways will all respond. The next chapter of your life isn't predetermined. It's being written right now by what you do this week. If you found this useful, please subscribe to the channel.